Well now, it looks like your flashlight batteries are a bit dim there, friend. One bullet short of a full clip on the lore front, if you know what I'm saying. Has Alan Wake 2 caused your mind to make a poo?
Oh, bother.
Well then come on over to my safe haven while my soothing, comprehensive lore light shines through into all those pesky dark presences in your understanding of Alan Wake 2 as we author up
More lore!
Alan Wake 2 does an excellent job of giving some closure to things from the first game, providing some clarification on others, and opening the doors for new questions and speculation. There is a ton to wrap your head around in this universe, and given so many still unanswered questions, how convoluted and meta the Alan Wake story sections of this game are, I'm still not totally sure even I understand it myself, but I'll do my best to provide answers or clarification on the way I've interpreted things. If you've played through Alan Wake and found yourself saying,
What the hell does that mean?
then you're not alone. I think the top clarification Alan Wake 2 provided in my mind was the fact that the powers of the Dark Place cannot create new things itself. It can fill in gaps with minutiae and incidental things, but it can't create by itself. Hence, its desire to lure in artists and creativity. Anything that comes out of the Dark Place must be inspired by things that already existed in reality to then be fictionalized. While this is a nice thing for Remedy to finally vocalize, it also adds a shit ton more moments of wait a minute, and to me, Alex Casey is the prime example of that. Wake wrote his original novels about a hard-boiled detective named Alex Casey, which is fine. At that point, someone else being named Alex Casey is just coincidence, as Alan wrote those books before any exposure to the powers of Cauldron Lake. Where the head-scratching comes in is Alex Casey existing in Alan Wake 2. Since Alan is the one writing Return, which features Saga and Alex, Alan needed to have at least known that there was a real person named Alex Casey to include him in the story, since a real person is required. But my question is, was the Alex Casey we see always a detective? Or did Alan's writing turn him into one, since he started using him as inspiration in his various writings in the Dark Place? Alan Wake 2 talks about how the twists of reality caused by the Dark Place can influence people's memories and make them start to believe the fictional story over what reality actually was. And since we learned from Control that Alex Casey, the FBI detective, only started investigating Alan Wake and his connection to him very recently, it leads me to speculate that the Dark Place started twisting this poor, unsuspecting Alex Casey from whomever he was before Alan entered the Dark Place to the FBI agent that is the character Alan created ever since Alan entered the Dark Place in 2010. There is also some Doctor Who levels of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wiminess to the way that Alan gets glimpses of real-world inspiration in the Dark Place. One of the motivators in Saga's side of the story is her being pissed at Alan because her daughter is dead in his story and she's divorced, and that is becoming reality due to Alan writing it into the manuscript for Return. Only, in the linear timeline of the real world, he didn't meet Saga until they talked in the overlaps, which happens after people had already started mentioning Logan's death to her. Time in the Dark Place clearly doesn't line up with time in reality. In fact, time doesn't mean much in the Dark Place at all, and runs in loops and spirals, and Alan can even call himself from the future. So don't even bother asking if the chicken or the egg came first over there in the Dark Place, because the answer is likely just yes. All of this stuff just leaves one big question in my mind regarding the Remedy-connected universe, which is, what events in the games genuinely happened in reality, and what events were influenced by writing? And on top of that, who's writing? The FBC, for example, had to already exist for it to be used in a story. But Jessie was just walking by when she became the director. Was it written she'd do that as part of Alan's story? Or even deeper, did Thomas Zane write that Alan would write that she would walk into the oldest house? Zane has been in the Dark Place creating for at least 53 years at this point, if not more, since he entered in the 70s and was diving down into the lake before that as well. How much of everything that happens in the world is influenced by his work in the Dark Place? Food for thought. Moving on! There are a bunch of subtle nods to other Remedy published titles throughout Alan Wake 2, as is the tendency for their games. Microsoft owns the Quantum Break license, so they can't use characters from it directly, but Sean Ashmore being cast as Tim Breaker is pretty on the nose. I mean, just add an E to his name and he is Time Breaker. Yeah. There's also the fact that only Tim seems to have an invested interest in Mr. Door, at least in this game, and Mr. Door also seems to have a particular grudge against him back, reminiscent of the rivalry between Jack Joyce and Mr. Hatch from Quantum Break without saying it overtly. And a hatch is a kind of door, so there you go. Tim also had drawings on his boards about a certain shape that also happens to match that of the countermeasure. Mr. Door also gets a brief nod in Control when Dylan Faden mentions he had a dream about him and that he could move across universes at will. Clearly a very powerful being, and I'm sure we'll learn more about his motivations and identity soon. Speaking of Control, there are also a couple small nods to Jesse and Dr. Darling, showing up on a TV screen playing Night Springs in Zane's room in the Ocean View Hotel, which is also a nod to Control. There is an announced upcoming DLC called Night Springs, releasing in early 2024, so I'm sure we'll learn more about them then. As the last bit of Control/Alan Wake 2 DLC tie-in, there is a facility near Cauldron Lake called the Lake House we do see the entrance to in the game, but can't access it all. Agent Estevez later mentions that the facility has been overcome by the darkness. The other announced DLC for Alan Wake 2 is named Lake House. So there's no release date set for that one yet though. One common theme in the RCU is the concept of powerful beings existing outside of our universe but encroaching upon it and either aiding or harming those they come in contact with. Characters like Mr. Door, Ahti, the Dark Presence, hell, even Zane, all have power and abilities well beyond what has yet been revealed to us. We don't know who any of them truly are, and how they are influencing the stories, or how the stories are influencing them. Ahti, for example, has shown up in both Control and Alan Wake 2, both times as a janitor. It's clearly a role he is happy to play as a helper. We don't truly know what his powers are, if any, but to put on the literal uniform of one who cleans, repairs, and maintains the functional state of their surroundings, it's safe to assume he's a benevolent force. A good guy. Doesn't explain why him and the Anderson brothers always refer to Alan as Tom, though. An answer to that one would be nice, Remedy. The final thing I wanted to chat through is gonna be a little bit more philosophical, in that I wanted to chat about the symbolism in the overarching story of Alan Wake as a series. There is a well-supported theory out there that the story of Alan Wake is very heavily based on Joseph Campbell's concept of the hero's journey. Without going into too much detail, it is an observation of common tropes of progression in both historical and modern myths and stories. The hero goes through 3 phases in this journey, defined as the departure, the initiation, and the return. Sound familiar? Those are the titles of the 3 books that Alan Wake wrote in the Dark Place. Essentially, it goes against the fabric of narrative storytelling for Alan to not go through all these phases appropriately to successfully reach his story's ending. This is very likely the precise reason why all his previous attempts at escape have failed. In Alan Wake 1, Alan writes the manuscript for Departure, the start of his journey. His life as a normal author is ripped from him as he is thrust into the tale of saving the world from the Dark Presence. Long story short, Alan successfully completes this phase of the journey by finishing the manuscript and swapping places with Alice, trapping himself in the Dark Place. Where he makes his mistake is in not paying proper respects to the journey he must take through initiation, and instead trying to jump directly into writing Return. Efforts that ultimately end up failing repeatedly, leaving Alan trapped and frustrated over these last 13 years, feeling like he's stuck in a loop. He's stuck in the initiation phase of his journey, but he doesn't realize it, so he can't progress. The events of Alan Wake 2 lead us through this realization. In fact, the very first interview with Mr. Door is when Alan is introduced to the fact that his next book should be Initiation rather than Return, which sets him on the right path. Alan starts plotting out Initiation on his writing board and living through the story he's writing. And while he still gets stuck in what feels like loops, dying and returning to the start, for the first time ever on his journey in the Dark Place, he is able to remember what happened in previous iterations of the loop, so he can learn from them and build on them. A fact that surprises even Zane, who is worse off than Alan when it comes to understanding narrative. Down here 53 years and he still hasn't figured out how to leave, and essentially caused this whole mess in the first place back in 1970 when he literally tried to strong-arm a happy ending to his story right from the get-go by just writing Barbara back alive. Anyway, back to Alan. His new journey of learning is also aided by his wife, Alice, who we learn during the events of Alan Wake 2 is actually down in the dark place with him, influencing him. As the events of his initiation come to a close, Alan begins to understand that he's learning, and so he utters the phrase, "It's not a loop, it's a spiral," a phrase very similar to the one he ended Alan Wake 1 with. "It's not a lake, it's an ocean." The difference between these two phrases is symbolic of the stage of understanding Alan is at in his journey. We still don't have an answer to what the lake-ocean quote means. Alan said it from a place of not having a true understanding of his place in the story, as he had only just finished Departure. Mr. Dorr even asks him what that line means, and Alan still has no idea. But his understanding of him being in a spiral, not a loop, actually has some justification behind it. We've been through it with him. We learned that at the same time he did. It has weight. He's becoming wiser, progressing in his journey. Apotheosis. Look it up. Then we come to Saga's half of the story, Return. Notice the subtitles in the chapter intro text. This iteration of the story was first written by Scratch and Zane together when Alan had decided to give up trying to write it after so many failed attempts. But Scratch's version was obviously twisted, meant only for Scratch to escape. During his initiation, at the ends of his loops, Alan would find the manuscript for it in the writing room and would start making edits to it, scratching out the bad things and editing in a hero, Saga, having met her during the overlaps. The game ends with the rewritten ending to Return that Saga and Alan co-wrote, with Alan being shot with the bullet of light and Saga's family being saved. Unfortunately, we don't know if that attempt at the story was successful, as the call to Logan wasn't answered. My guess is that this manuscript of Return wasn't the full real Return, and a new one will be written in Alan Wake 3. I think this manuscript for Return was simply a plot device to help Alan through his initiation, giving him the knowledge he'll need to write it properly and a new co-author in Saga, to help him keep his ideas in check. Well, that's all I have for today. There's still a lot more to interpret and discuss in this game, and I'm sure I'll have more content out for it soon for all of you. Please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, and drop a comment with other things you think I should cover. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next video, and as always, my friends, be legendary.